Lying is easy, but lying so well that banks hand you millions, governments fall for your tricks, and entire countries get embarrassed, that takes talent. The con artists on this list didn't just bend the truth, they built entire worlds out of it, and got rich while everyone else played catch up. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 interesting con artists who were just too good. 25. The Invisible Goldfish. Harold von Braunhut made a career out of selling kids things that weren't quite what they seemed. X-ray specs that didn't actually see through anything. Sea monkeys that were just brine shrimp. But his masterpiece was an invisible goldfish. The kit included a glass bowl, fish food, and a care guide. What it didn't include was fish. You know, because they were invisible. Guaranteed to never be seen. He literally sold nothing, charged money for it, and told everyone they sold out. The audacity alone deserves a slow clap. Surprisingly, von Braunhut held 195 patents and spent decades running mail-order rackets through these comic book ads. He passed away in 2003, having tricked generations of children into thinking empty bowls contained pets. 24. The Fake Police Station. Most people impersonate cops by flashing a fake badge, but Henry Terry built an entire police station. In the 50s, this Tennessee man set up a fully functioning fake precinct, complete with uniforms, patrol cars, and officers he'd recruited himself. Terry collected bribes from bootleggers, arrested people for making up crimes, and ran the whole operation like it was official. Local residents had no idea they were dealing with a completely fake law enforcement agency because he even had a judge on the payroll who would handle his cases. However, the whole operation fell apart when actual state investigators started wondering why there was a police department nobody had authorized. Terry went to prison, but you have to admire the commitment. Most cons are about pretending to be one person. He created an entire government institution. 23. The Black Magic Banker. In the 90s, a Malian businessman talked the Dubai Islamic Bank into handing over $242 million by saying he could double their money using black magic. Fotago Babani Sissoko told bank officials he possessed supernatural powers that would multiply any cash they gave him, and they bought it. Multiple executives authorized transfers totaling nearly $250 million, believing that juju and sorcery would generate returns better than any investment portfolio. Spoiler, it didn't work, though his disappearing act did. Sissoko vanished with the cash, leading to one of the most embarrassing banking disasters in Middle Eastern history. Several executives went to prison, and the bank spent years trying to recover funds. Lesson? If someone promises to double your money with witchcraft, maybe at least ask for references first. 22. The Woman Who Married a Woman. New Zealand's most notorious con artist wasn't a man, but she played one convincingly enough to get married. Amy Bach spent 25 years running scams across New Zealand, cycling in and out of prison so often that police recognized her methods on sight. By 1907, she realized her problem wasn't the scams themselves, it was that every detective in the country knew her face. Her solution was to simply stop being a woman. She reinvented herself as Percy Redwood, a rich Canterbury sheep farmer who claimed to have an archbishop in the family. Percy showed up at a boarding house in South Otago, charmed everyone in town, and started courting the landlady's daughter, Agnes Ottaway. He bought gifts, made friends, and built a reputation as the most generous gentleman around. Within weeks, he proposed. The wedding took place on April 21, 1909, with 200 guests and a local politician in attendance. 4 days later, police knocked on Percy's door. A detective who had arrested Amy Bach multiple times recognized her handiwork in the trail of unpaid debts. When confronted, Bach simply said, "I see you know it all." The marriage was annulled and Bach went back to prison. For years after, postcards of the dapper, pipe-smoking Percy Redwood sold by the dozens. 21. The Diesel Rock. In 2007, the self-proclaimed spiritualist Nomada Tangarira said that she discovered a rock that oozed refined diesel when struck. Government officials, including cabinet ministers, traveled to witness the miracle. They watched her smash the rock and saw fuel pour out. Certain they found an answer to the nation's energy crisis, they invested significant resources into the project. Plot twist, she'd been secretly pouring diesel into the hole beforehand. The whole thing was a hustle that cost Zimbabwe millions and embarrassed officials who should have known that rocks don't produce petroleum products. Tagariro was ultimately arrested, but not before becoming a national punchline. 20. The fake Russian princess. Eleanor Fletcher Bishop wasn't royalty. Not even close. But she played the part so well that New York's upper crust bought every word. Her character of choice? Princess Vera Dolothori of Russia, a noblewoman with a tragic past and a fortune tied up overseas. Her best mark was Harry Houdini. Bishop wormed her way into his life, spinning stories about her wealth and promising to leave him everything when she died. Houdini bit. He stayed close to her for years, probably already spending the inheritance in his head. Then, she actually died, and there was nothing. No fortune, no estate, no hidden accounts in Europe. The whole thing was smoke. The world's greatest escape artist got played by a woman whose only skill was lying with a straight face. 19. The Carnegie Heiress. Cassie Chadwick convinced American bankers she was the illegitimate daughter of steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, and they handed her millions without ever checking. Her setup was simple. She asked a lawyer to accompany her to Carnegie's New York mansion, went inside to chat with the housekeeper, and, on her way out, accidentally dropped a forged promissory note for $2 million. She swore the lawyer to secrecy about her shameful origins, knowing he'd tell every banker in Ohio by sundown. He did. For 8 years, banks threw money at her, assuming Carnegie would cover the debts. When he finally issued a statement saying he'd never heard of her, Chadwick was arrested wearing a money belt stuffed with $100,000 in cash. She died in prison 3 years later. 18. The boy band Ponzi scheme. Lou Pearlman created the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, launching one of the biggest musical franchises of the 90s. He was also running a $300 million Ponzi scheme on the side. While managing pop's biggest acts, Pearlman talked investors into pouring money into fake companies and non-existent savings programs. He promised returns that would never materialize, using new investor money to pay old investors while skimming millions for himself. The whole thing collapsed in 2006 when investigators finally untangled the fraud. Pearlman fled the country but was captured in Indonesia and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He died behind bars in 2016, owing victims more than $200 million. 17. The man who outconned a robber baron. Nobody knows Lord Gordon Gordon's real name. He might have been born around 1840 in England, but that's about all anyone can confirm. What we do know is that he successfully swindled Jay Gould, one of the richest and most ruthless businessmen of the Gilded Age, and that takes some serious nerves. In 1872, Gordon showed up in New York claiming to be a Scottish nobleman with 60,000 shares of Erie Railway stock. Gould was fighting for control of the railroad at the time and saw Gordon as an ally. He handed over $500,000 in cash and stock as a show of good faith. That's about $13 million today. Gordon took the money and vanished. Gould sued. Gordon fled to Canada and an armed posse from Minneapolis crossed the border to arrest him. Canadian authorities freed Gordon and threw the Americans in jail instead. When a Scottish jeweler finally identified him as a fraud in 1874, Gordon knew his luck had run out. He threw himself a farewell party in Manitoba, then ended his own life rather than face deportation. He is buried in an unmarked grave. No name at all. 16. The identity thief. Most identity thieves steal credit card numbers. Albert Walker, on the other hand, stole an entire person, then made him disappear. Walker was a Canadian financial advisor who embezzled millions from clients before fleeing to England in the 90s. To create a new identity, he befriended Ronald Platt, a lonely businessman, and gradually assumed his life. He took over Platt's name, his bank accounts, his passport, basically everything. When Platt started becoming inconvenient, Walker took him fishing. Platt didn't return. His body was found months later, identified by the Rolex still on his wrist. Walker was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, exposed by a dead man's expensive taste in watches. 15. The Captain of Köpenick. In 1906, a German shoemaker named Wilhelm Vogt bought a used Prussian military uniform, walked up to a group of soldiers, and commanded them to follow him. They did, without question. Vogt marched his borrowed troops to the town hall of Köpenick, arrested the mayor for irregularities, confiscated the municipal treasury, about 4,000 marks, and left. The soldiers obeyed every order because the uniform made them assume he had authority. Nobody asked for ID or questioned his credentials. He was caught 10 days later and sentenced to 4 years, but the public loved him. The Kaiser himself reportedly laughed at the story. So, Vogt became a celebrity, wrote a memoir, and spent his final years touring as the Captain of Köpenick, proving that sometimes the uniform really does make the man. 14. The fake foreign royal. In 1817, a young woman appeared in an English village wearing a black turban and speaking complete gibberish. A Portuguese sailor claimed he could translate. She was Princess Caribou from Javasu, an island in the Indian Ocean. Pirates had kidnapped her and she escaped by jumping overboard and swimming ashore. For 10 weeks, British high society treated her like royalty. She performed exotic dances, prayed to a made-up god, and had her portrait painted. Oxford scholars examined her native script and couldn't crack it. Then a landlady saw the newspaper portrait and recognized her former tenant. Princess Caribou was actually Mary Baker, the cobbler's daughter who invented the entire language. The British press mocked the aristocrats mercilessly. Baker was shipped to Philadelphia, tried a brief stage career as Princess Caribou, failed, and eventually returned to England to sell leeches to hospitals for the rest of her life. 13. The Confidence Queen. Bertha Hayman was known as the Confidence Queen of 1880s New York, and she earned every syllable of that title. Her specialty was playing a wealthy widow who needed a small loan to access her vast fortune. She'd befriend businessmen, lawyers, and bankers, then spin tales about inheritances tied up in legal disputes. All she needed was a few $1,000s to unlock millions. Victims lined up to help, certain they'd be repaid tenfold. When finally arrested, Hayman told reporters, "It is wrong to steal a loaf of bread, but not so bad to steal a million." She served multiple prison sentences and kept running schemes right up until the end. Her philosophy was that rich people have too much money anyway, so why not redistribute it? 12. The Chameleon. Frédéric Baudin impersonated over 500 people during his career, but his most infamous trick was pretending to be a missing Texas teenager named Nicholas Barclay. Barclay had vanished at the age of 13 in 1994. 3 years later, Baudin, a 23-year-old Frenchman with brown eyes and a heavy accent, talked authorities into believing he was the blue-eyed American boy. He claimed a trafficking ring had kidnapped him and changed his eye color. The family flew to Spain, accepted him, and brought him home. Baudin lived with the Barclays for 5 months before a private investigator noticed their ears didn't match. DNA also confirmed the truth, and Baudin went to prison. He later suggested that the family might have known all along because they had something to hide. Whether that's true or one more lie from a professional liar, nobody knows. But to this day, Nicholas Barclay remains missing. 11. The Nazi art forger. Hans van Meegeren was a Dutch painter whose original work was savaged by critics. So, he decided to prove them wrong by becoming the greatest art forger of the 20th century. He spent years perfecting techniques to create newly discovered works by old masters, particularly Vermeer. His forgeries were so good that museums paid fortunes for them. The crowning achievement? Selling a fake Vermeer to Nazi leader Hermann Göring for 1.6 million guilders. After the war, Van Meegeren was arrested for collaborating with the Nazis. To prove he hadn't sold a national treasure to the enemy, only a fake one, he created another Vermeer forgery while in custody. The demonstration worked, and treason charges were dropped. He died before finishing his sentence, proving that critics really don't know anything. 10. The Yorkshire Witch. In early 1800s England, Mary Bateman had people believing a magic chicken was laying eggs inscribed with prophecies about the apocalypse. The eggs read, "Christ is coming." Crowds gathered, and people paid money to witness the miracle. What they didn't know was that Bateman was inscribing the messages herself, then shoving the eggs back into the chicken. Eventually, someone caught her mid-insertion, and the whole thing collapsed. But Bateman's career didn't end there, as she moved on to poisoning wealthy clients for their money, which proved far less amusing. She was put to death in 1809, and over 2,500 people paid to view her body. Safe to say, even after her final breath, she was still drawing a paying crowd. 9. The Eternal POW. Oscar Dobman insisted he was the last German prisoner of war from World War I, still held captive in Russia until 1974. Germany welcomed him home as a hero. There were ceremonies, news coverage, reunions with family members who hadn't seen him in decades. But there was one small problem. None of it was true. The guy had never set foot in a Soviet prison camp. Not one day. He saw an opportunity and exploited it, knowing Germany still carried guilt about soldiers who vanished in Russia. He showed up with a sad story, and everyone wanted so badly for it to be real that they didn't ask questions. He cashed in for years, collecting government benefits, public sympathy, the whole package. By the time anyone bothered to dig into his background, he'd already gotten everything he wanted. 8. The Landmark Salesman. Arthur Ferguson, a Scottish actor, spent the 1920s persuading tourists that London's most famous landmarks were for sale. He sold Nelson's Column to an American for £6,000. He talked another tourist into believing Big Ben could be theirs for $1,000. He even got someone to put down a deposit on Buckingham Palace, explaining that the asking price was £2 million, but the government was willing to negotiate. When London got too hot, Ferguson moved to America and tried to sell the White House. That one backfired. The target got suspicious and called the police. Ferguson served 5 years in prison, then vanished from history. Probably retired comfortably on all those landmark deposits. 7. The Goat Gland Doctor. Speaking of wild schemes, John Brinkley persuaded thousands of men that transplanting goat testicles into their bodies would cure impotence, and they paid handsomely for the procedure. In the 20s and 30s, Brinkley built a medical empire around this completely fake treatment. He had his own radio station, ran for governor of Kansas, and nearly won, and operated on countless patients who believed goat parts would restore their virility. The American Medical Association shut him down, but not before Brinkley had made millions and caused numerous complications from his dangerous surgeries. He spent his final years fighting lawsuits and died bankrupt in 1942. The goat gland craze passed with him, thankfully. 6. The Double Agent. Loyalty wasn't really Douglas Bernaville Clay's thing. During World War II, this British citizen managed to serve in both the British SAS and the Nazi SS at the same time. He fed information to whoever was paying attention, switched sides when it suited him, and somehow survived the whole thing without getting shot by either side. The Allies thought he was one of them. The Nazis thought he was theirs. But the truth is, he was really just his own. After the war, he kept the act going, with fake names and multiple wives he never bothered divorcing, along with various money-making schemes that caught up with him. He did prison time and died with nobody remembering his name. But for a few years there, he'd pulled off something most double agents don't: to play both sides of a world war and walk away breathing. 5. The Fake Kubrick. Alan Conway spent years impersonating director Stanley Kubrick so successfully that he started believing it himself. Kubrick was famously reclusive. Almost nobody knew what he looked like. Conway exploited this by showing up at restaurants, parties, and industry events claiming to be the legendary filmmaker. He got free meals, VIP treatment, and promises of movie roles from people desperate to impress Hollywood royalty. The real Kubrick eventually found out and was reportedly amused. Conway kept going until his death in 1998, only a year before Kubrick himself passed. His story was so outrageous that it became a 2005 film called Color Me Kubrick, starring John Malkovich, though Conway never got paid for it, obviously. 4. The Spanish Art Counterfeiters. Two brothers from Girona, Spain bought what they thought was a genuine Goya in 2003. When experts declared it a 19th century forgery 3 years later, they decided to recoup their losses by scamming someone else. In 2014, they found a mark, a wealthy Arab sheik willing to pay 4 million euros. An Italian middleman brokered the deal, collecting a 300,000 euro commission from the brothers before handing over the down payment of 1.7 million Swiss francs. When the brothers tried to deposit their windfall at the Geneva bank, they discovered the bills were counterfeit, photocopies. The sheik and middleman had vanished with the only real money that changed hands, the brothers' own commission. It gets worse. French customs caught them at the border with the fake cash, alerted Spanish police, and they were arrested for attempted fraud. The fake painting was confiscated too. Everyone was a criminal. Every single one of them got fleeced. 3. The Pixelon Fraud. David Kim Stanley talked Silicon Valley into believing he'd invented revolutionary video streaming technology in the late 90s. He raised $28 million, threw a massive launch party featuring The Who and Kiss, and built a company called Pixelon. The technology didn't work at all. Stanley had fake demonstrations, exaggerated capabilities, and lied about basically everything. Worse, he was actually a convicted felon named Michael Feney who'd fled embezzlement charges in Virginia. The whole thing ultimately collapsed in 2000 when investors realized the product was vaporware. Stanley went back to prison, and Pixelon became a cautionary tale about the dot-com bubble's willingness to throw money at anyone with a good pitch deck. 2. The Immortal Alchemist. Giuseppe Balsamo was born poor in Sicily in 1743. After getting kicked out of a monastery, he convinced a wealthy goldsmith that he knew where demons were guarding hidden treasure. The goldsmith handed over a fortune. Balsamo took the money and fled Sicily forever. He reinvented himself as Count Alessandro di Cagliostro and spent decades touring Europe's royal courts, selling magic potions, love powders, and elixirs of youth. He held seances for high society and founded his own version of Freemasonry. Paris couldn't get enough of him. Then he got tangled up in a scandal involving Marie Antoinette that helped spark the French Revolution. He spent 9 months in the Bastille before being banished from France. He eventually tried to start a Masonic lodge in Rome. 2 of his recruits were spies for the Inquisition. He was arrested, convicted of heresy, and the man who claimed to be immortal passed away in a prison cell in 1795 at the age of 52. 1. The Poison Tester. Marie-Madeleine Marguerite d'Aubry, Marquise de Brinvilliers, wasn't only a con artist, she was a methodical poisoner who tested her formulas on hospital patients before using them on her family. She dressed up like a charitable noblewoman and made rounds at Parisian hospitals, handing out food and tonics to the sick. Nobody questioned a rich lady doing good deeds. What they didn't know was that she was actually running experiments, tracking which mixtures worked fastest and which ones left no trace. Once she had it figured out, she went home and used what she'd learned on her father and 2 brothers. All 3 were now gone, and that inheritance was finally hers. She would have gotten away with it too, but her lover kept letters. Very detailed ones. After he died, someone found them. Brinvilliers attempted to run, but still got caught and was put to death in 1676. France was so shaken by the incident that it created new poison control laws because of it. Alexandre Dumas later used her story in his novels. Horrific? 100% yes, but she did her homework. And that's all for today. Some of these people were clever. Others were genuinely dangerous. A few were both. What ties them together is the audacity, the willingness to look someone in the eye and lie without flinching. Some of their victims lost money, others lost far more, and a handful of these stories are almost funny until you remember real people got hurt. So, were you ever the victim of a con artist? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want even more outrageous deception, click here for 25 greatest con artists and the scams that made them famous. That's all for today. As always, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell, and I'll catch you in the next one.